Don't embarrass him tonight. Daniel's secretary said it so softly I almost thought I imagined it. We were standing just inside the ballroom at the Conrad Hotel in downtown Indianapolis, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and people wearing tuxedos that probably cost more than my first car. A string quartet played near the staircase while waiters carried trays of champagne through the crowd. Vanessa leaned closer, her perfume sharp enough to sting my nose. "The people here are far above your level," she whispered. Then she smiled. Not a friendly smile either. One of those tight little smiles women use when they already think they've won something. I looked at her for a second, then adjusted the sleeve of my navy dress and walked past her without saying a word. Daniel noticed the tension immediately. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Fine," I said. He looked relieved by that answer, which irritated me more than it should have. Because after 23 years of marriage, my husband had become a man who was mostly relieved when I stayed quiet. The gala was for St. Vincent Heart Center. Daniel's firm had sponsored one of the donor tables. A few years ago, he never would have cared about events like this. Back when we were first married in Bloomington, he used to make fun of corporate fundraisers and country club people. But success changes some folks slowly, like water wearing down stone. And Daniel had changed. I noticed it in little things first. The way he corrected how I pronounced wine labels. The way he started buying shirts that needed dry cleaning. The way he'd sigh when I talked too long around clients. Then came Vanessa. 32 years old, blonde, perfect posture, sharp heels that clicked across office floors like tiny warning signs. "She's organized," Daniel kept saying whenever I mentioned her. That was 6 months ago. Now she was standing beside my husband at charity galas, acting like she owned half his life. I spotted our table near the ballroom windows overlooking Washington Street. Daniel drifted off almost immediately after we sat down, stopping every few feet to shake hands. Vanessa stayed close behind him. Not beside him, close. Close enough to laugh at every joke before anyone else did. I tried focusing on the dinner menu instead. Herb-crusted chicken, roasted carrots, something involving truffle potatoes that sounded expensive and unnecessary. Across from me sat an older couple from Carmel who introduced themselves as Gary and Linda Pruitt. Linda smiled warmly. "How long have you and Daniel been married?" 23 years. "Oh my goodness," she said. "That's rare these days." Before I could answer, Gary chuckled, especially in finance. The table laughed politely. All except Vanessa. She was standing beside Daniel near the bar, watching me over the rim of her champagne glass. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not angry yet, just tired. Tired in the way women get when they've spent years pretending not to notice things. Around 8 o'clock, the host of the event stepped onto the stage for opening remarks. His name was Richard Bartlett, a wealthy donor who owned several medical supply companies across Indiana and Ohio. I recognized the name immediately. My father used to talk about him years ago. Richard thanked sponsors, hospital staff, and community leaders, while photographers moved through the ballroom snapping pictures. Then dinner service began. Daniel returned to the table just long enough to check his phone twice and tell me he'd be sitting with investors for part of the evening. "You don't mind, do you?" I smiled politely. "Why would I mind?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than the question itself. About 20 minutes later, I got up to find the restroom. On my way back, I passed Vanessa near the hallway leading toward the ballroom entrance. That's when she leaned toward me and whispered that line. "Don't embarrass him tonight." Like I was some unstable woman who might suddenly climb onto a table and start screaming. I should have snapped back at her. Honestly, part of me wanted to, but another part, the larger part, felt embarrassed for her. Because confident women usually don't need to humiliate other women in hotel hallways. I walked back into the ballroom alone, and then everything changed. Richard Bartlett himself was crossing the room toward me. Fast. People started turning their heads. At first I thought maybe something was wrong. Then Richard smiled. "Margaret Hale." I blinked. "Yes." "Oh my lord," he said, grabbing my hand with both of his. "We've been waiting all evening to meet you." The room around us suddenly felt very quiet. "I'm sorry I asked." "Your father was Thomas Whitaker, wasn't he?" I stared at him. Nobody had mentioned my father's name at events like this in years. "Yes," I said carefully. Richard laughed softly. "That man saved my family during the farm collapse back in the 80s. My father nearly lost everything outside Terre Haute. Your dad helped refinance equipment when nobody else would." Emotion climbed into my throat so fast it caught me off guard. "He talked about your father until the day he died," Richard continued. "When I saw your name connected to Daniel's table tonight, I told my wife we had to meet you." I noticed Daniel standing near the bar now. frozen. Vanessa beside him looked like someone had suddenly pulled the floor out from under her. Richard smiled warmly. "Come sit with us near the stage, please." People nearby were openly staring now. One woman even whispered, "That's Margaret Hale, not Daniel Hale's wife, just Margaret." And for the first time in years I remembered what that felt like. As Richard guided me toward the front tables, I glanced back once. Vanessa's face had gone pale enough to almost make me feel satisfied. The ride home from Indianapolis was painfully quiet. Rain tapped against the windshield as Daniel drove north on I-69, both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The city lights disappeared behind us, while country radio played softly through the speakers. I stared out the passenger window at dark fields and gas stations sliding past. Daniel finally spoke near Anderson. "You seemed uncomfortable tonight." I almost laughed. Uncomfortable. That was one word for it. "I was fine," I said. He nodded once. "Richard Bartlett can be intense. That's what you took from tonight." He glanced at me briefly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I folded my arms against the cold coming through the window glass. "It means your secretary whispered to me like I was trash in a hotel hallway." Daniel sighed immediately, not surprised, not angry. "Just tired. Vanessa can be socially awkward sometimes." I turned slowly toward him. Socially awkward. She probably meant the event was formal. "No," I said quietly. She meant exactly what she said. Daniel rubbed one hand over his jaw. "You're reading too much into this." That sentence sat between us the rest of the drive home. Because women my age know exactly what it means when a man says you're reading too much into things. Usually it means he's hoping you stop reading altogether. We pulled into our driveway in Carmel around 10:30. The porch light flickered the way it always did because Daniel kept forgetting to replace the bulb properly. Funny how a man can manage investment portfolios worth millions, but ignore a blinking light for 6 months. Inside the house, Daniel loosened his tie and headed straight for the kitchen. "You want tea?" he asked. "Number." He paused like he wanted to say something else. Then his phone buzzed. Even from across the room I saw Vanessa's name light up the screen. Daniel flipped the phone face down so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. That bothered me more than the message itself. I went upstairs without another word. That night I barely slept. Not because of Vanessa, because of Richard Bartlett. I kept thinking about my father. Dad ran a small agricultural lending office outside Bloomington for 30 years. He wasn't flashy, drove the same Ford truck until the doors rusted, wore cheap reading glasses held together with tape near the end. But people trusted him. Farmers especially. When banks started collapsing during the 80s farm crisis, my father spent months helping families restructure loans so they wouldn't lose land that had belonged to them for generations. I remember him sitting at our kitchen table with folders stacked everywhere while Mom reheated coffee 3 times a night. He died 11 years ago, and somewhere along the line I'd let myself become Daniel's wife instead of Thomas Whitaker's daughter. That realization stayed with me all week. So did Vanessa. Her presence around Daniel suddenly seemed constant. Calls during dinner, texts after midnight, Saturday client emergencies. Twice Daniel stepped outside to answer calls from her while we were watching television. The second time I muted the TV and listened through the front window as he paced near the mailbox. "No, she doesn't know anything," he said quietly. A long pause. Then, "You're overreacting." I felt my stomach tighten. When he came back inside, he acted perfectly normal. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work." Work. That word was becoming a hiding place. The following Sunday, we attended church at Northview like we always did. Same pew, same older couples greeting each other in the lobby afterward. Routine can hide a lot of unhappiness. After service, I was pouring coffee in the fellowship hall when an old friend named Denise Harper touched my arm gently. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Are you and Daniel doing okay?" My chest tightened immediately. "Why?" Denise looked uncomfortable. I almost didn't say anything. "Denise." She lowered her voice. "My sister saw Daniel in Louisville last spring, at the Brown Hotel." I stared at her. "He was there for a conference," I said automatically. Denise nodded slowly. "Maybe, but she said he wasn't alone." I felt heat crawl up my neck. "With Vanessa." She didn't know her name, Denise admitted, but younger blonde woman. For a second I honestly thought I might faint. Not dramatically. Just physically. Like my body suddenly got too heavy for my bones. Denise squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry." I drove home alone that afternoon because Daniel stayed behind for a finance committee meeting. At least that's what he said. I sat in the garage for nearly 15 minutes after getting home. Thinking. Remembering. Explaining things away? That's the dangerous part about long marriages. You become very skilled at protecting the version of your life you want to believe in. By Tuesday, I'd almost convinced myself Denise had misunderstood something. Then I found the paperwork. I was cleaning Daniel's office because we were expecting guests that weekend. His desk drawer jammed halfway open, so I tugged harder. A manila folder slipped onto the carpet. I almost ignored it. Almost. But then I saw Vanessa's full name typed across the top page. Vanessa Reed. My pulse started hammering instantly. Inside the folder were ownership agreements for Hale Financial Partners. And there it was in black ink. 5% transferred to Vanessa Reed 3 months earlier. I read the pages twice because they stopped making sense the first time. The company had been built during our marriage, which meant those ownership changes legally involved marital assets. Which meant, my breathing caught. There was a signature line with my name already signed at the bottom. Only I had never signed it. I sat there on the office floor staring at my own forged signature, while the grandfather clock downstairs ticked loudly through the house. One thought kept repeating in my head. Not just cheating, planning. Daniel wasn't simply having an affair. He was rearranging his future, and removing me from it piece by piece. I heard the garage door opening downstairs. Daniel was home. For one wild moment, I almost marched downstairs holding the folder. But something stopped me. Maybe survival instinct, maybe pride. Instead, I carefully put every document back exactly where I found it. That night, Daniel ate meatloaf at the kitchen island while talking about market projections like nothing in the world had changed. I nodded in the right places. Washed dishes, folded towels, pretended. But around midnight, after he fell asleep beside me, I quietly picked up my phone and searched for one name. Linda Carver. My college roommate. Now a family attorney in Bloomington. My finger hovered over the call button for nearly a full minute before I pressed it. I met Linda Carver at a diner off Interstate 69 on a gray Thursday morning in late October. The place smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, which honestly felt comforting after 3 straight days of barely eating. Retired couples filled most of the booths. A waitress with tired eyes kept refilling mugs without asking. Normal Indiana life, exactly what I needed. Linda spotted me first and waved from the back corner booth. She looked older than I remembered from college, but in a steady, reassuring way. Short, silver blonde hair, reading glasses hanging from her collar. The kind of woman who didn't waste time pretending things were fine when they weren't. The second I sat down, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You look exhausted. I feel stupid, I admitted. Linda shook her head immediately. Don't start there. I slid the copied paperwork across the table. Her expression changed as she read. By the 3rd page, she let out a slow breath through her nose. Well, she muttered, that's not good. My stomach tightened. How bad? She removed her glasses carefully. Margaret, if Daniel transferred company ownership using a forged signature tied to marital assets, that's serious. I stared down at my coffee. Part of me still wanted her to say there had been some misunderstanding. A clerical mistake, a technicality, anything. Instead, she tapped the documents again. Did you actually sign any of this? Number. And you're certain? I laughed once, bitterly. I think I'd remember signing away part of our business to my husband's secretary. Linda nodded slowly. Okay, she said, then we move carefully. That word again. Carefully. Everybody wanted me calm, measured, reasonable. Meanwhile, my entire marriage was starting to feel like a staged performance I'd accidentally walked into halfway through. Linda spent nearly 2 hours reviewing everything while I filled in details about Vanessa the gala, the late-night calls, and the Louisville hotel rumor. At one point, she asked quietly, "Do you think Daniel loves her?" That question hurt more than I expected. Because after 23 years, love wasn't really the point anymore. Trust was. Routine, history, shared grief, shared bills, shared memories. Those things become heavier than romance after enough time passes. I don't know, I finally said. Linda studied me carefully. Do you still love him? I opened my mouth, closed it again, then shrugged. I think I loved who he used to be. Neither of us spoke for a moment after that. The waitress brought pie we hadn't ordered. Apparently Linda was a regular. On the house today, the waitress said softly. Small-town kindness nearly broke me more than the betrayal had. Linda waited until the waitress walked away before speaking again. Margaret, I need you to understand something clearly. If Daniel's hiding assets and transferring ownership behind your back, this may not only be emotional, it could become financial survival. That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Financial survival. I'd spent years believing our marriage protected both of us equally. Now I was realizing how vulnerable women can become when they trust someone too completely, especially women over 40. Especially women who spent decades helping build a life instead of protecting themselves from it. The next few weeks became strangely quiet, not peaceful, strategic. I stopped confronting Daniel entirely. Stopped asking questions. Stopped watching his phone. Stopped reacting when Vanessa called during dinner. And weirdly, that seemed to relax him. Men notice anger. They rarely notice silence until it's too late. Meanwhile, Linda started digging. She requested public filings connected to Hale Financial Partners. She also advised me to quietly collect anything unusual inside the house. At first, I felt guilty doing it, like I was betraying my own husband. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I found hotel receipts hidden inside Daniel's laptop bag from a resort outside Louisville. 1 room, 2 guests, weekend stay. The dates matched exactly when he claimed he was attending a banking conference. After that, the guilt disappeared. A few days later, I visited Daniel's office downtown to bring him homemade chili because temperatures had dropped into the 40s. The receptionist looked startled when I walked in. "Oh," she said quickly, "Daniel's out. Client meeting." She hesitated too long. "With Vanessa." "Of course." As I turned to leave, I heard 2 younger employees whispering near the copy room. "That's his wife. She seems normal. I heard Vanessa say she barely leaves the house." I kept walking, but the words followed me all the way back to the parking garage. That night I sat alone in my car outside Kroger for almost 20 minutes before driving home. Not crying, just staring, trying to understand how my life had quietly shifted into something unrecognizable. Daniel arrived home late carrying takeout from a steakhouse I liked. Maybe guilt, maybe habit. He kissed my forehead casually. "You doing okay?" That question almost made me laugh. Instead I said fine. Then we ate silently while Wheel of Fortune played in the background like every other middle-aged couple in Indiana. Except nothing about us felt ordinary anymore. Around that same time, Linda uncovered another problem. Vanessa had apparently been using company funds for client entertainment expenses that included spa weekends, designer handbags, and luxury shopping trips in Chicago. That alone won't destroy Daniel, Linda warned during one phone call. But combined with everything else, it paints a picture. Still, I hesitated. Because exposing him publicly meant destroying our life too. Our son would find out, church friends, neighbors. 23 years reduced to gossip over grocery carts and church potlucks. One Sunday night I almost told Linda I wanted to stop everything. Then Daniel accidentally texted me something meant for Vanessa. We were sitting inside an Applebee's after evening church service because neither of us felt like cooking. He had gone to the restroom while his phone buzzed beside his plate. I didn't even mean to look. But the preview appeared across the screen automatically. "Can't stop thinking about your legs under that red dress tonight." I felt physically cold. A minute later, Daniel returned carrying extra napkins and froze when he saw my face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he slowly picked up the phone. "Margaret, you should probably send that to the right woman next time," I said calmly. His face drained of color. And strangely enough, that was the exact moment I stopped feeling heartbroken. Not because the pain disappeared, because humiliation finally turned into clarity. Later that night, after Daniel fell asleep downstairs pretending he had a headache, I called Linda. "I'm done protecting him," I said. There was silence for a second. Then Linda answered softly, "Okay, then let's finish this." By early November, the trees around Carmel had gone mostly bare. Cold wind pushed leaves across parking lots, and every grocery store in town already had Christmas decorations up before Thanksgiving even arrived. Life kept moving the way it always does, even when your marriage is quietly collapsing behind closed doors. Daniel acted nervous around me now. Not guilty exactly. Careful. Like a man walking across thin ice who isn't sure what I know. We barely argued anymore. That probably unsettled him more than screaming ever would've. He started sleeping downstairs 3 nights a week, claiming he was working late. Vanessa still called constantly, though. Now he stepped outside every single time before answering. Meanwhile, Linda was building a file thick enough to make my stomach turn. Expense reports, hotel receipts, internal emails, transfer records. The worst part wasn't even the affair anymore. It was realizing how long Daniel had been lying with a completely straight face. One Wednesday afternoon, Linda called while I was folding towels. "You sitting down?" "That depends." I spoke with one of Daniel's accountants. I stopped folding immediately. "What did they say?" "He's scared," Linda admitted, but he confirmed company funds were used for personal expenses connected to Vanessa. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "How much?" "A lot more than handbags and hotel rooms." Turns out Vanessa had charged spa retreats, airfare designer furniture, and even cosmetic procedures to business accounts under vague labels like client relations and executive travel. My first reaction wasn't anger. Honestly, it was embarrassment. Because I'd spent months clipping grocery coupons while those two treated company money like casino chips. Linda exhaled softly through the phone. There's more. Of course there was. Richard Bartlett invited Hale Financial to sponsor another charity event next weekend. Bigger crowd this time. Investors, too. I closed my eyes. Number: Margaret. I don't want some giant public circus. I know, but this may be the cleanest moment to protect yourself before Daniel starts moving money elsewhere. That sentence sat heavy in my chest. Protect yourself. Women my age weren't raised hearing that phrase enough. We were taught to preserve marriages, keep peace, hold families together, even when somebody else was setting the whole thing on fire. The event took place the following Saturday at the Indiana Roof Ballroom downtown. Same polished crowd, same expensive dresses, same fake laughter floating around giant floral centerpieces. Only this time I wasn't nervous. I was tired. And tired women stop fearing things eventually. Daniel looked startled when I came downstairs wearing a black velvet dress I hadn't touched in years. You look nice, he said cautiously. I smiled faintly. Thank you. Vanessa arrived separately this time, which told me Daniel had finally realized people were talking. Still, she hovered near him all evening like perfume with a pulse. At one point near the bar, she glanced at me and quickly looked away. That tiny crack in her confidence almost made me laugh. Almost. The ballroom filled steadily as local business owners, doctors, and politicians moved between tables. A jazz trio played near the stage while auction items lined the walls. Trips to Napa, signed Colts memorabilia, luxury golf weekends. Money everywhere. And beneath all of it, panic. Because Daniel knew something was wrong. I could see it every time his eyes landed on me. Around 7:30, Richard Bartlett approached our table, grinning broadly. Margaret, he boomed, you made it. Good to see you again, Richard. He squeezed my shoulder warmly. You know my wife's still talking about your father. That caught Daniel's attention immediately. Richard continued smiling. Matter of fact, we're honoring longtime community leadership tonight. I'd love for you to say a few words later. Daniel nearly choked on his drink. Oh, I don't think he started. I'd be honored, I interrupted calmly. Vanessa's expression tightened instantly. For the next hour, Daniel barely touched his food. Good. I'd spent months unable to eat properly myself. Shortly after 8:30, Richard stepped onto the stage to begin final auction announcements. Then he surprised half the room by calling my name. Applause scattered politely across the ballroom as I walked toward the microphone. My legs shook a little. Not from fear, from grief. Because standing there meant accepting my marriage was truly over. The ballroom quieted. I looked across the crowd and saw Daniel sitting rigid beside Vanessa. Then I took a breath. My name is Margaret Hale, I began, and my family spent generations believing community matters more than appearances. The room stayed still. I spoke about my father helping struggling Indiana farmers during the 80s, about building businesses honestly, about sacrifice inside marriages nobody else sees. Then my voice changed slightly. 23 years ago, my husband and I started Hale Financial from our garage with one folding table and a used desktop computer. People listened carefully now. I handled scheduling taxes, client dinners, bookkeeping. We built that company together while raising a family. Daniel looked physically ill. Vanessa kept staring at the tablecloth. Then I said the sentence that cracked the room open. Unfortunately, I recently discovered company funds and marital assets were secretly redirected without my knowledge. Silence, pure silence. You could hear silverware clink 3 tables away. Daniel stood halfway. Margaret. No, I said firmly, still calm. You've had plenty of time to speak. Linda rose from the back of the ballroom carrying a leather folder. A few people immediately turned to watch her approach. Daniel's face lost all color. I continued speaking. There's a difference between success and character. One can be purchased, the other has to be earned. Vanessa suddenly stood up. This is inappropriate, she snapped. Linda reached the table and quietly handed Daniel several legal documents. You've been served, she said evenly. That's when everything collapsed. Vanessa immediately turned toward Daniel. You told me this was handled. Handled, not denied. Handled. Several nearby guests exchanged stunned looks. Daniel hissed under his breath. Sit down. Oh, don't tell me to sit down now, Vanessa shot back loudly. People were openly staring now. One investor actually pushed his chair away from the table. Vanessa's voice rose another octave. You promised me ownership was legal. There it was. Public, ugly, real. Daniel tried grabbing her arm, but she yanked away hard enough to knock over a champagne glass. I simply stepped back from the microphone. No screaming, no dramatic scene. The truth was doing all the work for me. Richard Bartlett looked furious. Not at me. At them. Within minutes, people began quietly leaving Daniel's table. Conversations shifted. Phones came out, whispers spread. And suddenly the polished image Daniel spent years building started crumbling right there beneath ballroom chandeliers. I walked off stage feeling strangely numb. Linda met me near the hallway. You okay? I looked back once toward the ballroom where Daniel and Vanessa were now arguing openly beside shattered glass. Then I nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, I said, I think I am. The strange thing about public humiliation is how quickly it turns into silence afterward. 2 days after the charity event, nobody from Daniel's office called me. Not even Daniel. For 23 years, that man checked in about everything from grocery lists to insurance renewals. Now suddenly there was nothing but quiet. The house in Carmel felt different too. Not dramatic, just hollow, like a hotel room after checkout. I spent most mornings sitting at the kitchen table with coffee gone cold beside me while November rain streaked the windows. The grandfather clock still ticked in the hallway. The porch light still flickered at night. Funny the things that stay exactly the same while your life falls apart. Daniel finally came home late Monday evening carrying a garment bag and looking about 10 years older than he had a week earlier. He stopped when he saw me in the living room. You talked to lawyers, he said flatly. I muted the television, yes. He nodded once like he already knew. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he sat heavily in the recliner across from me and rubbed both hands over his face. I didn't think you'd do that publicly. I stared at him. That was what bothered him most. Not the lying, not the cheating, not forging my signature. The embarrassment. You publicly humiliated me for months, I said quietly. Daniel looked down at the carpet. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I almost laughed again. That sentence had become the anthem of selfish people everywhere. He started talking after that, fast, desperate. Vanessa pressured him. The business was stressed. He felt trapped. Things just happened. But the more he talked, the smaller he sounded. Finally, I interrupted him. Did you ever plan to tell me the truth? That question stopped him cold. He opened his mouth slowly, then closed it again. And honestly, that hurt more than any confession could have. Because silence is still an answer. Over the next several weeks, lawyers handled most communication. Linda helped me sort through financial records while Daniel scrambled to contain damage inside the company. Apparently, several investors backed away after the ballroom incident. One board member resigned completely. Richard Bartlett quietly withdrew support from 2 upcoming business partnerships. As for Vanessa, she disappeared almost immediately. Someone from church claimed she moved to Nashville. Another person heard Chicago. Small towns always turn betrayal into entertainment eventually. At first I hated that part. The whispers at Kroger. The awkward pity smiles. Women pretending not to stare at me during Sunday service. Then one afternoon, Denise Harper said something that shifted my thinking. We were loading canned goods into donation boxes at church when she touched my arm gently. You know, she said, people aren't whispering because you embarrassed yourself. I looked at her. They're whispering because you finally stopped letting other people embarrass you. That stayed with me. A month later, I moved out of the Carmel house. Not because the court forced it. Because I couldn't breathe there anymore. Every room held some version of the woman I used to be. I rented a small townhouse near Bloomington, closer to my younger sister Carol. Nothing fancy. Beige walls, tiny kitchen, grocery store 5 minutes away. But it was peaceful. For the first time in years, I started sleeping through the night. Winter settled over Indiana slowly after that. Bare trees, early sunsets, salt trucks lining roads before snowstorms. Life became smaller in good ways. Morning coffee, library visits, phone calls with my son. Long walks around Lake Monroe wearing gloves too thin for the weather. Healing didn't happen dramatically. No movie moments, no magical fresh start. Some mornings I still woke up angry. Other mornings I missed Daniel terribly, which embarrassed me more than I care to admit. Long marriages don't disappear cleanly. Even damaged love leaves fingerprints behind. Around February, Linda invited me to speak at a women's resource workshop in Bloomington. Mostly women over 40 dealing with divorce, financial problems, or late-life career changes. I almost said no. Then I remembered how terrified I felt sitting in that diner months earlier believing my life was over. So I went. The room held maybe 20 women in folding chairs drinking weak coffee from styrofoam cups. Nothing glamorous. And somehow that made it matter more. I told them the truth. Not the polished version, not the revenge story version people enjoy repeating. The real version. How easy it is to slowly disappear inside somebody else's life. How shame keeps women quiet. How fear convinces you to ignore things your heart already understands. A few women cried quietly. One older woman hugged me afterward and whispered, "I thought I was the only one." That nearly broke me. A week later, Richard Bartlett stopped by the center unexpectedly carrying 2 bakery boxes from a place in Indianapolis. My wife insisted he said with a grin. We sat together after the workshop ended, talking about Indiana basketball, old family farms, and how much downtown Bloomington had changed over the years. Before leaving, he paused near the doorway. "Your father would have been proud of you," he said softly. I couldn't speak for a second. Because after everything that happened, that was still the compliment that mattered most. Not revenge, not public humiliation, not winning. Just dignity. That's the word I understand differently now. People think dignity comes from status or money or being admired at fancy parties. It doesn't. Sometimes dignity is simply telling the truth after years of swallowing it. And sometimes the people who look down on you are standing on ground you quietly helped build. If this story meant something to you, I hope it reminds you that silence and kindness are not weakness. And if you've ever had to rebuild yourself later in life, you are not alone in that journey.